I was 4 or 5 years old when I was brought into a neighbor's backyard and sexually molested. The daughter offered me some Kool-Aid and invited me to swing on their swing set. I was instructed to strip naked and swing with my legs apart. I was threatened with a punch if I replied no. I was not physically modest at the time, and I assumed they were playing a cruel joke on me. At first, I was enraged. There were a few people in the backyard, including an older male, some high school lads, a few little boys, and myself. Johnny, my little neighborhood pal, was swinging next to me. He was a year my junior and had a little impairment. He was only allowed to play outside if he was with me. His mother and my mother made me the little caregiver, and we spent a lot of time playing together. I felt quite protective and motherly towards him. When I turned my head to the right and saw Johnny, nude and screaming frantically, I realized this was more than just a prank. I felt horrible, since I was expected to look after and protect Johnny. I can't express how helpless I felt when I saw Johnny in pain and knew I couldn't assist him. This is the point at which my memory leaves me. This event has stayed with me for the rest of my life. What I didn't remember was how much Johnny was in pain or how disgusted I was by this. I don't remember how I got out of the swing. Maybe I fell, but I do remember what happened afterwards. I was screaming and twisting my arms and legs, hands on my lips to suffocate me, voices screaming that I was bad, I should stop talking, hands on my throat, pressure, dreadful pressure on my mind. I was doing everything I could do to hang on. I had no idea I was fighting strangulation, and I was only trying to battle the pressure in my head, a sense of impending doom. This is when I launched out into dark space, plummeting quickly, stars all around but far away. I was falling through infinity, head over heels, on and on, horrible. At this point, I'd want to state that I'm aware that horrific things happened to me throughout my NDE. I was raped by more than one man or older boy and forced to do sexual actions on other youngsters while others looked on. I have an unsettling memory of the smell of another tiny neighborhood boy's sweat. I'm not sure what we did. I have flashes of remembrance, but I don't pursue them. I tried to stay away from them. Then I noticed Jesus. I didn't know anything about Jesus, but I knew he was there. He told me that I didn't have to keep falling, and that I could fly instead. He told me that if I moved my arms in a certain way, I would be able to fly. I pulled it off and rushed up to him. He was standing on a platform outside of a location, a something. I'm not sure if it was a solid, Earth-like location, a vehicle of some kind, or a floating space island. I hesitate to use the term spaceship because my encounter had nothing to do with UFOs or other similar phenomena. It was unmistakably Jesus who met me. He was unquestionably an extraterrestrial. That is, he did not live on Earth, but he had nothing to do with typical notions of aliens. However, Jesus may have offered me to enter a spacecraft of some kind, or perhaps the moon. He led me into what appeared to be an entryway and slammed the door behind me. We entered a spacious room filled with people who were having a good time and enjoying each other's company. There was a delight in the gathering that was unfamiliar to me yet appeared to be exactly the way it should be, or something I knew existed but had never experienced until that time. We didn't stay in that room, but instead entered a long hall or corridor. This corridor appeared to be quite lengthy and faded into the distance. The building was impressive, but I don't recall many details. On each side of the corridor, there were doors. Each door led to a repository of knowledge and pure essence of a specific sort of earthly thing, such as plants and growing things or jewels and minerals. He brought me inside some of these chambers and showed me incredible things that I still remember. He said that the essence, not the manifestation, was the actuality of each thing. This was also true of persons. I believe I learned a lot about plants and gardening as well as stones and minerals. I still remember some things and have used this information all my life, even if I don't recall where I got it. I knew that mullein was good for the skin, that I could eat peppermint from the creek to make my stomach feel better, that there was a plant called Indian soap plants that could be used to wash my hands, and so on. All of this looks quite interesting now, but I recall what occurred next much more vividly. After our tour of the numerous chambers, Jesus led me back to the main area. He showed me the big crowd that had gathered. I was totally aware that each individual was cherished and valued by Jesus, just as they were. They were not the world's great and famous people, but rather ordinary people. The most significant thing I realized was that everyone there, whether a child or an adult, loved, valued, and cherished everyone else just as much as Jesus did. Because they were the only one. Everyone knew and valued them. Everyone was praised for who they were. Jesus pointed to a tiny child. The boy wiggled his ears, and the whole merry band burst out laughing and clapping their hands as though he had just run a 2-minute mile. This was to demonstrate to me where the genuine value lay, in the person, not in his accomplishments. I was utterly engulfed in this mutual adoration and respect. It felt quite lovely to my young heart, I remember. I knew that was the proper way for people to interact with one another, but I had never seen it in action before. We stayed in the spacious room with the happy folks like this for a long period. It seemed to last considerably longer than the time we spent looking at other rooms. It seemed as if the spirit of worth, respect, and cherishing that filled the large room was filling me up. Then Jesus spoke to me about how amazing everything was. "This is quite awesome, isn't it?" I enthusiastically replied in the affirmative. Then he pointed down to the ground and showed me rows of school desks generally occupied by young lads. He reminded me of how depressed these boys were because they were failing in school. This reminded me of something that happened to me in school when I did really well on a test but was chastised for making those boys feel foolish. This was extremely unjust because, after all, we were instructed to try our best and I did my best. But, obviously, I took my teacher's reprimand extremely seriously. Because after showing me the rows of desks, Jesus asked if I wanted to stay with him or return to earth so I could tell these boys how essential they truly were, even though they would never do well in school. I didn't even have to think about it. "Yes," I said. "I'd go back and tell the lads how valuable they are." I can't say I remember what happened after that. The next thing I remember is being in the kitchen of my neighbor's house. Their mother had returned home. "Why did you do it?" she said, her voice harsh and solemn. I said that because Margaret threatened to strike me if I didn't. I assumed she was referring to pulling my clothing off and swinging. When I said this, she became very silent and had a worried expression on her face. She instructed me to go into the restroom and change my clothing. I recall the bathroom being filthy and stinking terrible, a smell I had never experienced before. My mother was waiting for me when I came out. I informed her that they had claimed I was bad. She replied I wasn't bad and nothing terrible had happened because of me. I absolutely trusted her, so much so that I've never felt guilty about anything that transpired that day. We returned home, except for a brief conversation at the doctor's office. We never discussed what had occurred. I asked Johnny if I might play with him a day or two later. My mom told me not today. I inquired again the next day. She stated that Johnny had relocated. I never saw or heard anything further about him. This disturbed me greatly because I so wanted to tell Johnny about my time with Jesus and how essential and cherished Johnny was. Another evidence occurred shortly after this event when my mother took me to the doctor, who examined me and briefly brought up the matter of the abuse. We didn't talk about what had happened to me, but about the mission I had been assigned. On the drive home, I mentioned how much I wanted to teach my friends about their worth and how much I adored them. My mom felt I'd make an excellent teacher. I was also relieved that I decided to return to school as a teacher rather than a student. I had ideas like, all of what we're studying in school isn't as important as what I have to teach. For a brief minute, I believed I might be permitted to share my story with my classmates. Everyone, I assumed, was aware of what had occurred and wanted to know what I had learned from my trip to heaven. My mother then politely chuckled and told me that I needed to finish school before I could become a teacher. This was bad news because I thought we were on our way to school where I would start teaching that very day. But I fought back and asked how long I had to go to school. She stated that it would take 12 years to complete high school. I thought it would be a long time, but I knew I could do it. Then she said 4 more years of college and maybe a year at a teacher's school after that. I just sat in the car, despondent, because my mind couldn't take me that far. In my 5-year-old heart, I felt like I had failed my mission. I really wanted to complete my objective, but they wouldn't let me. My mom was not aware of my NDE. I now know. I don't understand how a group of children can be sexually molested in someone's backyard and no one knows about it. Perhaps they kept it hidden because it was so heinous and potentially humiliating. I clearly don't know how to express what had happened to me. This presents a lot more to say because my cousin, who was there that day, continued to attack me. He occasionally stayed with my family because he was in problems in his hometown. He figured out how to employ the chokehold on me so I wouldn't cry out when he raped me. I believe I eventually agreed to this maneuver since it was far easier than refusing. I believe he waited until I was sleeping before forcing me to pass out fully. I can't believe I've died and resurrected so many times, but I've always assumed that this ability to leave my body was granted to me so I wouldn't be present when I was being raped. Other times, I flew and did vital, eternal things with Jesus and other spiritual beings. I recall once coming back down to earth and being able to simply control my motions. I flew down in a huge spiral, swooping through the thick Ponderosa pines near my house and landed by a peach tree in our back meadow. Then I dashed inside, crawled into my bed, and awoke the next morning as usual. All of these recollections began to surface just before this cousin's death in the autumn of 2019. I had no recollection of what he had done to me until after he died. He was a man who was arrested for auto theft in 26 states. No joke. He tormented animals and exposed pornographic pictures to his young children. He was frequently getting into difficulties with the cops. All of this has been told to me by others, and it's consistent with what he did to me. I have some concerns. Am I the same person who went up there? Is it even possible for me to be human anymore? I'm so different from everyone else.